What would you do if a single letter shattered everything you believed about your 50-year marriage? Evelyn, a devoted wife, finds an old letter exposing her millionaire husband William's shocking secret. This discovery sets off a journey of betrayal, love, and redemption. The stately old villa stood on a gentle hillside surrounded by centuries-old oak trees. The exterior walls bore a pale gray hue, weathered by time and dotted with patches of moss, evoking the sense of a place steeped in memories. Large wooden windows with white trim reflected the soft morning light, filling the interior with an air of warmth and solemn dignity. The living room was the heart of the villa. On the main wall hung a series of finely framed family photographs, meticulously arranged. Among them was a wedding portrait of William and Evelyn from the 1970s, the two of them standing side by side, their smiles radiating joy. Beside it were photos marking significant milestones in their lives. William receiving an honorary degree from a prestigious university, yellowed newspaper clippings celebrating his business achievements, and snapshots of the couple's travels across the globe. On a carefully polished oak shelf, precious mementos were displayed, a trophy commemorating William's first successful business deal, and a leather-bound photo album, its edges worn with time, brimming with images of the garden he had tended for over 50 years. Everything was arranged with deliberate care, not merely to showcase pride, but to preserve stories that remained untold. Outside the villa, the gentle morning sunlight bathed the front garden. At 75, William Carter still carried himself with a robust grace. His tall frame, slightly stooped with age, moved steadily, and his hands, once hailed as golden hands in business, now worked with practiced tenderness, nurturing each flower bed with precision. He was pruning a rose bush, the steady snip of the shears breaking the stillness. The crimson roses, vibrant symbols of love and passion, swayed softly in the morning breeze. William leaned closer, his fingers brushing the velvety petals, his gaze momentarily warm before a flicker of pensiveness clouded his expression, his thoughts wandering far away. In the distance, beyond the garden, the thick trees on the hill formed a natural wall. William paused, his eyes drawn to that hill where sunlight pierced through the dense foliage in golden shafts. A quiet stillness passed over his face, not the serenity of peace, but a profound and unspoken yearning, as if memories long buried had stirred in the stillness of this moment. The straw hat on his head tilted slightly as he let out a soft sigh and returned to his work, seeking to chase away the weight of his thoughts. The garden remained a vibrant tapestry of colors, yet beneath its tranquil beauty, there lingered something unsaid, something that would forever remain veiled in the silence of unspoken truths. Inside the spacious kitchen, the early morning light streamed through the large windows, spilling over the marble countertop and illuminating a space brimming with warmth and vibrant hues. White curtains swayed gently in the soft breeze, carrying with them the faint fragrance of flowers from the garden outside. Evelyn Carter, a woman of color with a sturdy build that belied her nimbleness, stood by the stove. Her hands moved deftly as she flipped slices of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The sizzle of hot oil mingled with the gentle clatter of utensils, creating a quiet symphony of morning sounds. The light touched her face, highlighting her smooth, rich brown skin and the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of a life lived with resilience. Yet her eyes sparkled with undiminished strength and joy. Evelyn swayed lightly to a jazz melody floating from a small radio perched on a shelf, humming along with an air of quiet contentment. The aroma of freshly toasted bread wafted from the oven, wrapping the kitchen in an even cozier embrace. Evelyn added a few eggs to the skillet, cracking the shells with practiced ease. The scene was simple yet vibrant, brimming with vitality, just like her. She was the steadfast heart of the home, a devoted wife who had kept the flame of love alive in their family for 50 years. From the kitchen, Evelyn's resonant yet warm voice rang out through the slightly open window. The stillness of the morning seemed to come alive with the cheerfulness carried in her tone. "Evelyn."
"William, today is a special day. Don't you dare tell me you've forgotten, because honestly, if you have, I don't know what to think of that memory of yours."
She chuckled softly as she spoke, her lips pressing together as if to suppress her amusement. Her hands kept moving, stirring a steaming cup of coffee, its rich aroma mingling with the comforting air of the kitchen. Evelyn glanced out the window, waiting for a response from the man she knew so well. The way he looked, the way he looked, the way he reacted, every little nuance. Out in the sunlit garden, William paused in his work. He looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it melted into a mysterious smile. The kind Evelyn often teased him about, saying it made him look like he was hiding a treasure chest full of secrets. William, calling back with his deep, steady voice.
"Forget, Evelyn. How could I? How could I possibly forget a day as important as this? Lord knows, I've even got a special surprise planned for you."
Evelyn set the spoon down on the counter, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to decipher more from his tone. She raised an eyebrow, her eyes twinkling with a mix of suspicion and delight. "Evelyn," half jokingly.
"You're always full of secrets, aren't you? But William Carter, just remember, God may have given me patience, but he also gave me curiosity. So if your surprise doesn't live up to the hype, I promise you'll be the one cleaning this kitchen tonight."
William laughed heartily, his voice ringing out across the garden. He placed his shears down and turned to face her, his expression a playful mix of mischief and devotion. William, grinning.
"You always know how to back me into a corner, don't you? But this time, Evelyn, I promise I won't disappoint. Really thank the Lord for giving me someone as extraordinary as you. Just a little more patience, and you'll see what I've prepared."
Evelyn crossed her arms, tilting her head again, her smile growing wider. Evelyn, smiling.
"A little more patience. Fine. I suppose God's been teaching me that lesson since the day I married you. But all right, William, I'll wait. Just know, I'm not easily impressed, you know."
William simply winked, a gesture brimming with unspoken meaning, as though to say he knew Evelyn better than anyone else ever could. Then he turned back to his roses, meticulously tending to them. For a moment there was silence between them, not the cold, empty kind, but a silence rich with the unspoken bond of a love that had weathered countless seasons. Evelyn, awfully, almost to herself.
"Lord, thank you for giving me a husband who's equal parts mystery and trouble. But I suppose I wouldn't change a thing."
The quiet words didn't reach William's ears, yet he looked up once more, his gaze drifting toward Evelyn as if he sensed her thoughts. Between them lay something invisible yet undeniable, something neither needed to say aloud, a connection timeless, unyielding, and eternal. William paused mid-motion, the garden shears frozen in his gloved hand as he hovered over a fully bloomed rose. A gentle breeze swept through the garden, causing the petals to ripple like tiny waves on a still pond. His pale blue eyes, so often filled with warmth and quiet confidence, now carried a different hue, distant, shadowed by a weight he did not speak of. He looked toward the far hill, where the morning sunlight pierced through the canopy of ancient trees, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow like strokes on an unfinished canvas. His face fell, the smile he had worn for Evelyn just moments ago dissolving into an expression of muted tension. His lips pressed together, the gesture subtle but betraying an unease he couldn't quite mask. His gaze remained fixed on that hill, as though it held some secret, or perhaps as if he were watching a vision visible only to him, a scene etched in memory, unreachable yet vivid. The lines on his forehead deepened, and his shoulders, which once stood proud and unwavering, now sagged ever so slightly under the weight of his thoughts. A faint sigh escaped his lips, so soft it might have been carried away on the wind. His ungloved hand drifted instinctively to his chest pocket, where something rested. A small object whose significance was known only to him. His fingers tightened around it briefly, as if seeking solace or tethering himself to an emotion he couldn't afford to let slip away. But after a few moments, William straightened, drawing in a deep breath. He shook his head lightly, as though shaking loose the web of thoughts that had momentarily ensnared him. He bent again to the rosebush, resuming his careful pruning. His hands moved with practiced precision, yet his eyes, though now focused on the work before him, still harbored an unspoken sorrow. The subtle shift in his demeanor, fleeting but profound, seemed like the kind of change only someone deeply attuned could discern. The garden, with its vibrant blossoms and tranquil air, remained as picturesque as ever. Yet the piece was now tinged with an almost imperceptible dissonance, a quiet, somber note that lingered in the air. The dining room of the villa exuded a timeless elegance, warm and inviting despite its antique charm. Soft morning light filtered through sheer lace curtains, casting shimmering patterns on the polished wooden floor. The walls, painted in a gentle cream tone, served as a backdrop for a collection of family photographs and framed accolades that covered nearly every inch. In the right corner, a large portrait of William and Evelyn on their wedding day hung prominently, a reminder of their radiant youth. Smaller photographs, capturing moments from the past 50 years of family life, were neatly arranged beside it. The entire room felt like a small museum, preserving fragments of the family's shared history. At the center of the room stood a magnificent oak dining table, an heirloom worn by time but steadfast in its enduring strength. On the table, breakfast was laid out with simple precision: a plate of fried eggs, slices of toast, and a gleaming silver coffee pot placed at the center. Wooden chairs with floral cushioned seats encircled the table, radiating a sense of warmth and familiarity. Against one wall stood a low wooden cabinet with several drawers. The third drawer from the bottom jutted out slightly, as if it had been opened not long ago. It was here that the letter was discovered, a small slip of paper, yet heavy with the weight of secrets and time. Though the room was bathed in light and rich with cherished memories, the atmosphere seemed to shift as Evelyn's gaze lingered on the partially open drawer. The cabinet, an unassuming piece of furniture on any other day, now loomed as the focal point of her unease. It stood at the intersection of love, nurtured over decades, and the disquiet of a truth on the brink of revelation. Evelyn moved toward the low wooden cabinet beside the dining table, her hands searching for the embroidered tablecloth she always reserved for special occasions. The drawer let out a soft creak as she pulled it open. Inside were familiar items: a few old hand-stitched napkins, a box of candles and matches, and a small pale yellow envelope neatly tucked in the corner. Her eyes immediately locked onto the envelope. It was worn, its edges slightly frayed, as though it had been hidden away for decades. A peculiar feeling rose within her, a mix of curiosity and unease, as if she had stumbled upon something that was never meant to be uncovered. Carefully, she picked up the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as her fingers brushed over the handwritten words on its surface. The inked letters were sharp yet hastily scrawled, marking a date: March 15, 1973. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine. 1973. The first year of her marriage to William, a time when they had been struggling to build a life together amidst the weight of societal prejudice. Evelyn, murmuring,
"Dear God, what is this?"
She couldn't tear her gaze away from the envelope. An inexplicable sense of foreboding gnawed at her. For a moment, she stood frozen, the air around her seeming heavier with each passing second. Evelyn took a deep breath, forcing herself to steady her nerves. Yet as her fingers moved to open the envelope, a quiet prayer escaped her lips. Evelyn, whispering,
"Lord, let me be wrong. Please, let this be nothing. Something trivial, not something that could change everything."
With the letter in her hand, Evelyn stepped out of the kitchen, her legs feeling like lead. Every step she took was heavy with hesitation, yet the determination to uncover the truth propelled her forward. She made her way to the garden, where William was still tending to the rose bushes. She stopped just a few feet away from him. William, engrossed in his work, didn't immediately notice her presence. Evelyn tightened her grip on the letter, her voice trembling but laced with unmistakable resolve as she spoke. "Evelyn."
William.
William looked up, his expression shifting as he saw her stern face. A flicker of unease crossed his eyes. He set the shears down, wiping his hands on his canvas trousers before taking a step closer to her. William, offering a faint smile, his tone calm but guarded.
"What is it, Evelyn?"
Evelyn held the letter up in front of him, her voice now sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Evelyn," deliberately, her words clipped.
"What is this, William? What are you hiding from me?"
William froze. The faint smile vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. He blinked, as if trying to compose himself, and replied with a voice that strained to sound steady. William, hesitant.
"It's just something from the past, Evelyn. Nothing to worry about."
But Evelyn wasn't swayed. She stepped closer, her voice rising, thick with hurt and anger. Evelyn, sharply.
"Nothing to worry about. You think God gave me faith only to have it betrayed. William, this is from 1973. The first year we were married. I deserve to know the truth."
She stood tall, her hand trembling as the letter quivered in her grip. Her normally gentle face was flushed with anger, her eyes glistening with pain and bitter disappointment. Evelyn, her voice firm and unyielding.
"What past, William? What past could you possibly have that you couldn't share with me? We've been together for 50 years. 50 years? William, for God's sake, don't you see how wrong this is? I can't accept secrets from you, not after everything we've been through together."
William took a step back, his confusion plain on his face. His hands lifted slightly, as if to calm her, but his gaze faltered, unable to meet hers directly. His voice was low, almost pleading, but the tremor in his words betrayed his struggle. "William," quietly.
"Evelyn, I understand how you feel, but please, listen to me. This happened so long ago before we even met. It doesn't matter anymore. And I swear to God, I never meant to hurt you."
Evelyn let out a bitter laugh, a sound laced with disbelief and anguish. She took another step closer, her voice breaking yet remaining razor sharp. Evelyn, biting.
"It doesn't matter. You think it doesn't matter? You wrote that I wasn't to know the truth? You wrote that the very year we were married? How long did you plan to deceive me, William? For God's sake, I trusted you more than anyone in this world."
William bit his lip, his face contorted with guilt. He reached out, as if to take her hand, but she stepped back, her fiery gaze stopping him in his tracks. William, imploring.
"Evelyn, please. I don't know how to explain this, but I swear, I kept this secret only to protect you, to keep us happy. I didn't want the past to destroy what we have now."
But Evelyn was beyond hearing his excuses. She tightened her grip on the letter, her voice cutting through his words like thunder. Evelyn, interrupting.
"Protect me. You think God gave me strength so I could live in lies? What kind of happiness is built on secrets? William, the truth always finds its way out, no matter how long you bury it. And I cannot live with this."
William bowed his head, unable to speak further. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time in their marriage, he looked utterly defeated. Yet even then, he lacked the courage to face Evelyn and confess. Evelyn stared at him, her eyes blazing with a mix of despair and fury. Tears rolled down her face, but her voice remained steady, unshaken by the storm raging within her. Evelyn, raging within her.
"If you think silence will make this better, you're wrong. I will not let your past and your secrets destroy who I am. And I swear to God, William, I will uncover the truth myself, no matter how much it hurts.
Evelyn stood motionless, her gaze fixed on William. But the look in her eyes, once filled with trust and unyielding love, was now clouded with profound pain and unmistakable doubt. Her eyes, which had always been William's refuge, a place of tenderness and understanding, now brimmed with a heartbreak that cut to the core. She stared at him, as though searching for answers in his faltering expression, but all she found was evasion and unease. The man she had loved her entire life now seemed a stranger, like a portrait torn into pieces by secrets unspoken. Evelyn, whispering, her voice breaking,
Dear God, how could you hide something so enormous from me?
She took a shaky breath, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. Her heart ached, as though a fissure had appeared in the walls of love and trust they had built together over the years. Evelyn had once believed that nothing could shake their bond, that their marriage was a union blessed by God, unbreakable, yet now everything felt uncertain. William remained silent. He stood there, head bowed, offering neither justification nor explanation. His hands clenched tightly, made no move to reach for her, as if he knew that any gesture might only deepen the chasm between them. Evelyn continued to look at him, her stare cutting like a blade. At last, she turned away, her shoulders trembling as she fought back tears. With each step away from the table, the weight in her chest grew heavier. Evelyn, softly, almost to herself,
Dear God, grant me strength. I don't know how much more my heart can bear.
Her footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floor, but to William, each one was like a hammer blow to his soul. He lifted his gaze, watching her retreating figure, his lips moving as though to call out to her, yet no sound emerged. The room slowly fell into silence, the morning light streaming through the windows, accentuating the void left behind. William remained where he was, standing alone amidst the trappings of a lifetime of shared memories. His eyes fell to the old wooden table where they had, just minutes ago, shared a breakfast interrupted by an old letter and a flood of emotions too complex to contain. In the silence, William's shoulders sagged. He murmured under his breath, the words weighted with regret. William, whispering,
Dear God, what have I done?
In the upstairs bedroom, Evelyn sat silently by the window, clutching the fragile letter as if letting it go would cause it to vanish, taking with it the answers she so desperately needed. Her gaze drifted to the distant hill outside, where the fading light of dusk painted the landscape in soft golds and deepening shadows. Yet peace eluded her. Her thoughts were anything but serene. Evelyn, whispering, her voice a mix of sorrow and resolve,
Lord, you have given me strength to endure trials greater than this. I need to know the truth. If William won't tell me, I'll find it myself.
She rose to her feet, her steps now steadier as a decision took form in her mind. Though betrayal gnawed at her heart, Evelyn knew she could not let William's silence keep her from the truth. Questions echoed ceaselessly in her mind. What was this secret? Why had he hidden it for 50 years? And how much would it change everything they had built together? A name suddenly surfaced in her thoughts. Diane. Diane had been Evelyn's closest friend since her early days in Georgia. She knew that Diane and William had known each other before Evelyn entered his life. If anyone might hold a clue about the past William was trying to bury, it was Diane. Evelyn drew a deep breath, her hand pressing lightly against her chest as though to steady the rapid beating of her heart. Evelyn, praying softly,
Dear Lord, guide me. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it may be.
As darkness crept into the room, Evelyn's resolve burned brightly. She quickly grabbed her coat and bag, her movements purposeful, leaving no room for hesitation. Without a word of explanation, she stepped out of the house, disappearing into the dim light of evening. Far across town, Diane had no inkling of the confrontation that awaited her. Diane's house sat quietly on a peaceful street at the edge of town. It was a modest home with a cream-colored facade, surrounded by a pale green wooden fence. Though small, the house radiated warmth and charm, with lace curtains adorning its windows and a delicate wind chime hanging from the front porch, its soft tinkling carried by the evening breeze. The front garden was lovingly tended, with wild daisies and lavender blooming in neat rows, their scent gently perfuming the air. A wooden swing sat near a cluster of rose bushes, seemingly a favorite spot for its owner to relax, read, or reflect. Yet, despite the house's inviting aura, Evelyn couldn't shake the sense of unease that hung over her. Stepping out of her old car, Evelyn felt the gravel crunch beneath her shoes as she made her way up the short path to the steps. Her posture was upright, her silhouette strong, but her eyes carried a steely resolve, as if each step forward was a silent prayer for strength. Standing before the dark brown wooden door, Evelyn hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, her fingers clenched tightly, knuckles whitening, as though she were wrestling with the storm of uncertainty within her.
"Dear God, help me find the answers I seek,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. At last, she raised her hand and knocked. The sound of 3 firm raps echoed through the quiet, shattering the peaceful stillness of the house. A soft gust of wind brushed past, stirring the lavender in the garden and sending a chill down Evelyn's spine. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, unwavering yet tense. Evelyn had no idea what awaited her on the other side. Ruth, deception, or questions even harder to face. But she knew there was no turning back now. The door opened slowly, revealing Diane's face, her gray-streaked hair neatly pinned back and her sharp eyes scanning Evelyn with a flicker of apprehension. Diane's gaze lingered on her friend's resolute yet sorrowful expression. "Diane."
"Evelyn, what's going on?"
Evelyn gripped her purse tightly, her eyes glinting with a determination that even Diane couldn't dismiss. Evelyn, firmly,
"I need to talk to you, Diane. It's important."
The warmth of the porch seemed to drain away as a heavy tension settled in the air. Diane hesitated for a long moment, as though weighing the gravity of the situation, before finally stepping aside and opening the door wider to let Evelyn in. Diane's small living room radiated warmth, bathed in the soft golden glow of a lampshade atop the tea table. But that warmth was powerless to dispel the tension that hung thick in the air between the two women. The space felt stifling, as though every sound had been swallowed by the weight of unspoken truths. Dim light cast shadows across the porcelain teacup, its steam rising in thin, fragile wisps, a futile effort to break the heaviness that enveloped the room. Evelyn sat in an armchair near the fireplace, her hands resting on her lap, fingers tightly clenched as though holding back the flood of emotions surging within her. Her gaze fixed on Diane, unyielding and unrelenting, as if sheer will alone could compel her friend to speak. Across from her, Diane poured tea from an old ceramic teapot, her hands trembling just enough for the teaspoon to clink faintly against the cup. The delicate sound broke the suffocating silence. Placing the cup in front of Evelyn, Diane sat back, her face etched with worry. "Diane."
"Evelyn, are you sure? I don't think you should go any further with this."
Evelyn arched an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Evelyn, curtly,
"I'm sure."
Diane sighed, her gaze dropping to the cooling tea in her hands. "Diane."
"William's past. It isn't simple, Evelyn. It won't be easy to accept."
Her voice trailed off, as though each word required careful consideration. Her eyes darted nervously, avoiding Evelyn's piercing stare. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, her brow furrowing at the hesitation she detected. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Evelyn spoke again, her voice clear and resolute.
"Diane, I am not the kind of person who runs from the truth. God as my witness, I am ready to face whatever it is, no matter how difficult. I need to know, and I will know.
Diane lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with conflict. She seemed caught between the desire to speak and the instinct to withhold. But Evelyn's unwavering determination made further evasion impossible. Diane, sighing deeply, her tone heavy.
You've always been this way, Evelyn. So steadfast, so strong. But this time, I'm afraid what you'll find will hurt you.
Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes flashing the mix of determination and worry.
Please, Diane, you know I can't let this go. Whatever it is, I need to know. I can't live with secrets, especially not from William. He's my whole life.
Diane swallowed hard, her hands clutching the edge of the table as though for support. Her gaze still wavered, but at last she exhaled heavily, preparing herself for the confession she had hoped to avoid. Diane, slowly, her voice trembling.
William, he had a family before he met you. A wife.
The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock and disbelief through Evelyn. She sat upright, her eyes wide with astonishment and confusion. Her mind reeled as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Evelyn, interrupting, her voice shaking.
A son? Diane, what are you saying?
Diane glanced at Evelyn, but couldn't hold her gaze for long. She looked down, her hands trembling as they clutched her teacup, a futile attempt to steady herself. Diane, softly, hesitantly.
I don't know much, Evelyn. Only that. William had a son from his first marriage, but no one knows what happened to the child.
Silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of a wall clock. Evelyn felt as though a tidal wave had crashed into her, sweeping away everything she thought she knew. Evelyn, shaking her head, her voice quivering.
Diane, you know more than you're telling me. I can see it in your eyes. Please, tell me everything.
Diane pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she wrestled with her own turmoil. At last, she set the teacup down and clasped her trembling hands tightly together. Diane, her voice cracking.
Evelyn, I don't know all of it, but what I do know is this. It's not simple. William, he didn't want anyone, especially you, to carry the pain of this past.
Evelyn rose abruptly from her chair, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and unshakable resolve. Evelyn.
If William thought hiding this would help, he was wrong. Dear God, I can't live with these secrets. I have to know the truth, Diane.
Diane watched her friend with a heart full of worry and apprehension. Diane, whispering,
Evelyn, sometimes the truth is more painful than you can imagine.
Evelyn paused at the doorway, turning back to meet Diane's gaze. Her eyes gleamed with a determination that was impossible to ignore. Evelyn.
Painful or not, I deserve to know. And I swear to God, I won't stop until I have my answers.
Evelyn sat motionless in the armchair near the tea table, the world around her seeming to close in, leaving only the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner to break the silence. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white, as though she was physically holding herself together, grasping for the fragile thread of composure amidst the chaos swirling within her. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, accentuating the lines carved by years of life, marks of age, but now etched deeper by the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. Her eyes were clouded, not with tears, but with the storm of emotions raging inside her. Pain, confusion, and an almost unbearable intensity that threatened to tear everything apart. She tried to take a deep breath, but each inhale felt as though a rope tightened around her chest, leaving her gasping for air. Diane's words echoed relentlessly in her mind, each syllable a sharp blade cutting into her heart.
William had a son. No one knows what happened to the child.
Every word struck like a hammer, unleashing a flood of questions Evelyn had never imagined she would face. How long had William kept this from her? What had he been thinking, looking at her every day and saying nothing? How could he have concealed this for 50 years? Evelyn lifted her gaze to the empty space before her, but all she saw was a haze of tangled thoughts and emotions. Her eyes shone with a raw, unfiltered agony, the kind that left no room for pretense or denial. Evelyn, her voice trembling, almost a whisper.
How could he do this to me, Diane? How could he keep something like this from me?
Diane, seated across from her, lowered her head in silence. Her eyes flickered with deep sympathy, but also a helplessness that she couldn't hide. Diane, softly.
Evelyn, I think he did it because he was afraid.
Evelyn let out a bitter laugh, one devoid of joy, laced instead with pain and disbelief. Evelyn, angrily.
Afraid? William Carter, afraid? He's never been afraid of anything in his life. He faced down his family's disapproval, defied society's judgments just so we could be together. And now you're telling me he was afraid to tell me the truth.
Her hands clenched even tighter, as though summoning strength from within to keep herself from breaking apart. Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze piercing through Diane with a mixture of anguish and fury. Evelyn, with rising intensity.
I lived my whole life believing there were no secrets between us, that what we had was real and unshakable. But now, dear God, I see that there were things he never told me. How can I trust anything anymore? Diane?
Diane looked up at Evelyn, but her eyes faltered, unable to fully meet her friend's anguished gaze. Diane, hesitant.
Maybe he thought it would hurt you more. Maybe William was trying to protect you, Evelyn.
Evelyn shook her head, the bitterness in her voice cutting through the air like ice. Evelyn.
No, Diane, no. Protect me by deceiving me for a lifetime. Do you have any idea what this feels like? It's as though every year, every moment I've lived was built on a lie.
She closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to contain the tidal wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. When she opened them again, her expression had shifted, not just pain or anger, but a blazing determination that could not be extinguished. Evelyn, steadfastly.
But I won't live like this, Diane. I can't. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it is, no matter how much it changes everything I believed.
Diane sighed, her eyes filled with both worry and a deep sense of powerlessness. Diane.
I just hope you're strong enough to face it, Evelyn.
Evelyn rose abruptly from her chair, her strength seemingly surging back with renewed force. Her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed firmly on the doorway, on the path she knew lay ahead, fraught with challenges she could no longer avoid. Evelyn, with resolute clarity.
I don't need hope, Diane. God has given me strength, and I won't stop until I have the answers.
Her words rang out like a solemn vow, so powerful that the room itself seemed to tremble in its wake. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked away, leaving Diane sitting in silence, consumed by worry. But Evelyn did not look back, for she knew nothing could stop her now. Evelyn stepped out of Diane's small house, her feet crunching against the gravel path with each step, every movement feeling heavier than the last. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the narrow road ahead, but in her mind, everything was cloaked in a dull, oppressive gray. A soft breeze stirred the lavender lining the path, their delicate stems swaying gently. But Evelyn didn't notice. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon. Her eyes cloudy and distant, as though trying to pierce through the tangled layers of memory and thought. Diane's words echoed endlessly in her mind.
William had a son. No one knows what happened to the child.
Every word rang like a tolling bell, reverberating through her soul, shaking loose questions she wasn't sure she had the strength to confront. Her steps slowed until she stopped entirely. Standing still in the middle of the road, Evelyn drew in a deep breath, but the crisp evening air only tightened her chest further. She clutched her purse tightly, as if it were the only anchor she had in the storm of emotions threatening to consume her. The pain swelled inside her, sharp and overwhelming, Dear God, why? She wondered. Why would William hide this from me? 50 years, not 1 year, not a decade, but half a century, he had lived beside her, looked her in the eye every day, and said nothing of this truth. The thought ignited a spark of anger within her, a flame that burned brighter and hotter with each passing moment. Evelyn couldn't fathom how the man she had loved and trusted, above all others, could conceal something so profound. It felt like a betrayal, not just by William, but by the memories and trust she had built their life upon. Evelyn, whispering hoarsely,
Dear God, how could he do this to me? Did he think I didn't deserve to know the truth?
She resumed walking, but her steps felt detached, almost mechanical, as though her body moved out of habit while her mind remained ensnared in its turmoil. She tried to piece together fragments of memory. Their first year together, fragments of memory. Their first year together, their late-night conversations, their smiles and promises. Was it all a lie? She wondered, the question gnawing at her relentlessly. The path back to her house seemed endless, stretching out longer with every step. Each movement forward required her to push past the confusion and ache swelling in her chest. Yet amid the chaos, a new fire of determination began to blaze within her. Evelyn, murmuring to herself,
If he thinks I'll let this go, he's mistaken. I will find the truth, and God will bear witness to it.
She lifted her head, her gaze still distant, but now tinged with an unmistakable glint of resolve. Evelyn knew the road ahead, this journey to uncover the truth, would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew she could not continue living without confronting it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, surrendering to the encroaching darkness, Evelyn's storm of emotions raged on, unrelenting. The night would come, but there would be no peace, not until every secret was dragged into the light. Darkness had fallen, blanketing the quiet town, yet in Evelyn's mind, the lingering light of sunset still flickered, illuminating the shadowy corners of her memories and emotions. As she stepped through the door of her home, the familiar walls no longer felt like a sanctuary. Unconsciously, her feet carried her to William's study, as though an invisible force was guiding her. The study, always orderly and meticulously arranged, now felt like a place of turmoil and contradiction. The small desk lamp cast a soft, golden glow over the wooden surfaces, creating patterns of light and shadow that mirrored the confusion roiling within her. On the walls hung carefully framed family photos, reminders of the happiness Evelyn had once believed to be whole and complete. Her gaze fell upon one picture in particular. William cradling an infant she did not recognize, his smile radiant but now shrouded in questions that clawed at her heart. Her eyes shifted toward the small safe tucked into the corner of the cabinet. Evelyn drew in a deep, trembling breath, summoning courage, and stepped closer. Her fingers shook as they touched the lock. The combination, William's birthday, felt like a bitter irony, a cruel reminder of the man she thought she knew better than anyone. Evelyn whispering,
Dear God, guide me. If this is what I must know, grant me the strength to face it.
After a few seconds, the lock clicked open. Evelyn knelt before the safe, her breath hitching as she peered inside. Folders were neatly arranged, but her attention was drawn to a large brown envelope marked with faded handwriting. Custody Agreement, 1973. Her hands trembled as she lifted the envelope. The rough texture of the paper felt like a cruel reminder of the harsh truth awaiting her. Carefully, she opened it, pulling out a thin stack of typed documents. Evelyn sank into the chair, the lamplight illuminating the papers in front of her, casting faint shadows on the desk. Her eyes fixed on the stark black text, and an undeniable ache began to swell in her chest. At first, the words seemed mundane, familiar phrases she had seen countless times in William's business dealings. But as she read further, each line became a dagger, cutting deeper and deeper and deeper. Agreement to relinquish parental rights. Father's name, William Carter. Child, Michael Carter, born June 12, 1973. Conditions. William Carter agrees to relinquish all paternal rights and responsibilities in exchange for a business opportunity in New York. A strangled breath escaped Evelyn's lips, her mouth pressed into a tight line, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the papers, the edges curling under the pressure of her hands. The words swam before her eyes, mocking her, turning the past 50 years of her life into something unrecognizable. Evelyn, whispering, her voice breaking.
No, this can't be.
She read and reread the lines, desperate for them to change, to prove her wrong. But the truth was laid bare, cold and unyielding, staring back at her from the page. William, her husband, the man she had loved and trusted for half a century, the man who had built their family with pride, had once abandoned his own child for the sake of ambition. Evelyn placed the papers on the desk, her hands shaking as though the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Her eyes, drawn by a morbid compulsion, returned to the documents. A loose piece of paper slipped from the envelope and fluttered onto the desk. Her trembling fingers picked it up. It was a handwritten note. The familiar script, unmistakably William's, laced with raw emotion.
Michael, my son, I'm sorry. This was the only way I could secure a future for both of us.
Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs as if the room itself had collapsed around her. Reading those words, the weight of the truth became unbearable. She lowered her head onto the desk, sobs racking her body as her grief poured out, shattering the oppressive silence of the study. Evelyn, through her tears,
Dear God, I don't know what to do. How could he do this? How could he keep this from me all these years?
The darkness outside the window seeped through the curtains, mingling with the storm of emotions raging within her. But amid the despair, something else began to stir, a spark of resolve. Wiping her tears, Evelyn sat upright, her red-rimmed eyes reflecting a growing determination. The words on the papers wounded her deeply, but they also kindled an unyielding will to uncover the whole truth. This could not be the end of her journey. Evelyn, whispering, her voice resolute.
I don't know, William. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, but I won't stop here.
She stood, her gaze fixed on the door, toward a future filled with unanswered questions. Evelyn knew that to face this truth, she would need strength from her faith, from within herself and from the fire that now burned brighter in her soul. The darkness in the room no longer frightened her. It spurred her forward, quickening her steps toward the answers she knew she deserved. Evelyn stepped out of William's study, clutching the stack of documents so tightly that the rough edges dug into her palms. Each step down the hallway toward the living room felt like an eternity, as though she was carrying the full weight of the truth that had just been unearthed. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the searing anger mingling with the deep ache in her chest. When she entered the living room, the documents crumpled slightly under her grasp. Her eyes, blazing with a mixture of fury and heartbreak, locked onto William, who sat in the armchair by the window. The soft glow of a floor lamp cast a muted light on his silver hair, outlining the silhouette of a man lost in thought, blissfully unaware of the storm about to strike. Evelyn, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence.
William.
William jolted, looking up, his expression startled by Evelyn's sudden entrance. But what truly froze him in place was her gaze. No longer warm and familiar, but burning with anger and laced with a pain so profound he could barely meet her eyes. Evelyn stepped closer, raising the stack of documents like irrefutable evidence of his betrayal. Evelyn, voice trembling but resolute.
What is this, William? Is this what you've been hiding from me for 50 years?
William's eyes fell on the papers as if they were searing into him with truths he could no longer deny. His hands gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles whitening. For a moment he couldn't speak, his body frozen under the crushing weight of her accusation. The confidence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the unmistakable heaviness of regret. His head bowed, unable to withstand the intensity of her gaze. Evelyn, pressing, her voice rising.
"Why, William? Why would you do this? How could you keep this from me?"
Her voice cracked with emotion, a painful mixture of anguish and rage. She stood tall, but her trembling hands betrayed the storm within. The pain had pushed her beyond the limits of her endurance. William drew a deep, shaky breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage to face her. But when he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with tears that spilled silently down his cheeks. The man who had always seemed unshakable now looked broken, his voice trembling as he spoke. "William."
"Evelyn, I'm sorry."
The apology came weakly, almost as though he knew it was utterly inadequate. Evelyn shook her head sharply, her eyes blazing with hurt and fury. Evelyn, biting.
Sorry isn't enough, William. I don't want an apology."
Her voice cut through the room like a blade, leaving no room for excuses. Evelyn's grip on the documents tightened, her hands shaking as waves of emotion crashed over her. "Evelyn."
"Why did you do this? Why did you think keeping this from me for a lifetime was the best choice? Did you even think about how I would feel? Did you think about how I would feel? Did you think about the 50 years we've spent together?"
William lowered his head again, unable to answer. The weight of her questions seemed to crush him further into the chair. Another tear rolled down his cheek, his trembling hands rising to his face as he tried to steady himself. "William," his voice breaking, speaking slowly.
"Evelyn, I couldn't face that pain."
He paused, inhaling deeply, but the breath caught in his chest. When he continued, his voice cracked as though each word tore at his soul. "William."
"I couldn't bear to see my son taken from me, but I thought, if I let go, if I sacrificed that pain, I could give you."
Evelyn's eyes widened, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. His answer did nothing to soothe her pain. It only fanned the flames of her disappointment. Evelyn, cutting him off, her voice bitter.
"A better future? You thought abandoning your own flesh and blood for money and ambition was a better future?"
William lifted his gaze to hers, desperation gleaming in his tear-filled eyes. "William."
"No, Evelyn, not for ambition, not for money. I did it for you."
His words hung heavily in the room, raw and desperate. Evelyn's brow furrowed, her eyes reflecting the battle waging within her, between wanting to believe him and the sharp sting of betrayal. Evelyn, firmly.
"For me? You thought I would want this? That I would accept 50 years of lies because you thought it was the best choice?"
William shook his head vehemently, as if trying to erase her accusations from the air. "William?"
"Evelyn, you don't understand. I couldn't let everything fall apart. We had nothing back then. I thought if I made that sacrifice, if I buried that pain, I could build a life we deserve."
He stopped, his shoulders trembling under the weight of his words. When he spoke again, his voice cracked with anguish. "William."
"I signed that agreement, Evelyn. I gave up my rights to Michael for a chance to work in New York. I hoped I could forget, that I could bury it forever."
His head dropped again, tears falling onto the floor, glinting faintly under the lamplight. "William," his voice barely audible, full of remorse.
"But I was wrong. I know I was wrong, Evelyn."
Evelyn took a step back, as though his words were physically pushing her away. Yet her tear-filled eyes remained locked on him, reflecting the pain and confusion surging through her. Evelyn, whispering, her voice choked.
"You gave up your own child for a dream only you decided on?"
William stood abruptly, reaching out as if to touch her, but she took another step back. The resolve in her eyes stopped him cold. William, desperate, his voice trembling.
Evelyn, I know this is unforgivable, but you have to understand. I didn't do it for me. You were the only light in my life. You were the only light in my life. You were the reason I kept going after everything I lost.
Evelyn stepped back, her legs feeling as though they carried the weight of stone. Yet the fury and heartbreak coursing through her kept her upright. The stack of documents in her trembling hand seemed to shake not just from her grip, but from the storm of emotions within her, threatening to spill over. Evelyn, her voice trembling, choked with emotion.
But you didn't just abandon your son, William. You buried my trust along with him.
William remained frozen in place, as if her words had pinned him to the floor. His eyes were locked on her, but Evelyn's gaze no longer held the warmth or understanding he had relied upon for decades. Instead, it brimmed with disappointment, as if she were staring at a stranger, a shadow of the man she thought she knew. Evelyn, her voice rising, the pain unmistakable.
We've lived alive for 50 years.
The final words cut through the quiet of the room like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. Evelyn's reddened eyes bore into William, though no tears fell. Instead, the fire of betrayal burned brightly, consuming every corner of her soul. Slowly, Evelyn placed the stack of documents onto the table, as though its weight was too much to bear any longer. The soft rustle of paper meeting wood was barely audible, yet to William it sounded like a thunderclap carving deeper into his guilt. Her gaze remained fixed on him, her tear-filled eyes fierce, piercing through whatever defenses he might have left. Evelyn, quiet but resolute.
I trusted you more than anyone in this world, William. I thought we were a team, that nothing could shake the bond we built together. But now I see it was all an illusion. A dream I lived while you hid this truth from me.
William didn't respond. His lips moved as if to speak, but no words came. His shoulders sagged, his eyes falling to the floor as though he couldn't bear to meet her stare a moment longer. Evelyn let out a faint laugh, but it was devoid of any joy, laced instead with bitterness and despair. Evelyn, slowly, each word dripping with hurt.
Do you even know how this makes me feel? Like I've spent my entire life loving someone I never really knew?
The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, laden with the weight of everything unsaid and the emotions too large to express. Evelyn drew a deep breath, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her chest, as if to still the erratic rhythm of her heart. Evelyn, her voice soft but cutting.
I don't know if I can forgive you, William. Not because you gave up Michael, but because you gave up the truth between us.
William collapsed into the armchair by the fireplace, as though the very strength that had once defined him had drained away. His trembling hands cradled his head, fingers digging into his scalp, as if trying to shield himself from the shame etched across his face and the crushing memories flooding his mind. His shoulders, once proud and upright, slumped forward, shaking under the weight of his anguish. Tears, rare and unbidden, slid silently down his weathered cheeks, soaking the hands that had once been steady and decisive. Now, he was but a shadow of himself, a man undone by his own choices. The steady ticking of the wall clock echoed in the quiet room, each beat like a hammer striking the anvil of William's guilt. It was a relentless reminder of what he had lost and the irrevocable mistakes he could never undo. William, voice choked, breaking apart.
Evelyn, I only wanted you to be happy.
He lifted his head slightly, his tear-streaked eyes searching for Evelyn's face. But her gaze, cold and steeped in disappointment, remained distant, a barrier he could neither breach nor dismantle. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and each word he forced out felt as though it scraped against him. William.
I swear to God, I never thought this would come back to haunt us like this.
He inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself, but the breath caught in his chest, sending another shudder through his weary frame.
I thought, if I buried it deep enough, if I never spoke of it, we could live a peaceful life, a life I prayed God would protect for us.
His head bowed again, his shaking hands falling from his temples and hanging limply at his sides. His eyes fixed on the floor as though searching for solace in its patterns. But no relief came. William, with a heavy sigh,
But I was wrong, Evelyn. I know I was wrong.
He looked up again, his tear-filled eyes pleading with her, his voice quieter now, laden with raw sorrow. William, slowly, deliberately.
I've prayed thousands of times, Evelyn, prayed for God to forgive me. I prayed he would keep us happy. But I never dared ask him to forgive me for keeping this from you.
The oppressive silence of the room swallowed his words. Evelyn stood motionless, her arms limp at her sides, her tear-filled eyes no longer flashing with anger, but glistening with profound disappointment. A loss she had never imagined she would have to endure. Her mind churned, spinning through a cascade of cherished memories, now tainted by the cruel truth laid bare. The room's silence was broken only by the steady ticking of the clock and William's labored breaths. Evelyn glanced toward the tea table, where the stack of documents sat like an unyielding monument to the betrayal she had just uncovered. Without a word, Evelyn turned away. Her first step was soft against the wooden floor, but to William it landed like thunder, cleaving an even deeper divide between them. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step carrying the weight of her pain, disappointment, and sense of loss. The documents remained on the table, no longer belonging to her or the life she thought she knew. At the doorway, Evelyn paused. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, distant, as though lost in the storm of emotions raging within her. Evelyn, whispering, as if to herself,
If God can forgive, can I?
But no answer came. Evelyn continued forward, not looking back, not sparing a glance for the man she had once trusted more than anyone in the world. Her silhouette disappeared through the doorway, leaving the room steeped in absolute silence. William remained seated, unmoving, as though he had turned to stone. His hollow eyes stared at the empty space where Evelyn had stood, but they were void of the light that had once defined him. A man once confident, now utterly lost. The faint light from the window filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. The room had become more than a physical space. It was now a prison, its walls lined with memories and regrets that bound William like chains he could never escape. Meanwhile, Evelyn, carrying the weight of her pain and disappointment, had already begun a journey William did not yet know about. In the days when suspicion had first taken root, Evelyn had reached out discreetly to an old acquaintance, a private investigator she knew through her church community. With quiet determination, she had set in motion a search for the name written in the documents, Michael Carter. Weeks had passed, and now Evelyn held the answers she had sought. In her handbag, alongside the stack of old documents, were new ones, records, photographs, and an address. The name that made her heart tighten every time she read it: St. Joseph's Charitable Center, Chicago. Among the papers was a photograph of a man, Michael, with kind yet sorrowful eyes, smiling as he stood among a group of children. Evelyn sat upright in the armchair of her bedroom, her gaze fixed on the photograph resting on her desk. The memory of her final conversation with William echoed in her mind, his words reverberating like a haunting refrain. But she no longer waited for explanations or apologies. Evelyn, whispering with determination,
Dear God, I don't know what I will find, but I have to meet Michael.
As the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, Evelyn rose, carefully placing the photograph and papers into a small suitcase. She took a deep breath, her eyes now alight with a new fire, not of anger, but of purpose. This journey was not just about finding answers. It was about reclaiming the missing pieces of a life that had been kept from her. Evelyn rolled her suitcase to the door, her steps slow but steady. Chicago and Michael awaited her. The St. Joseph Community Center was nestled on a quiet street in Chicago, its modest appearance a stark contrast to the towering skyscrapers that surrounded it. The building's cream-colored facade was adorned with small windows, each lined with vibrant potted plants that added a touch of warmth amid the bustling cityscape. On the glass doors at the entrance, a hand-drawn message in colorful chalk read, "St. Joseph Community Center, where hope begins." The writing exuded an inviting sincerity, as though the building itself extended a welcome to all who entered. Evelyn stepped slowly through the main doors, her hands gripping her purse tightly, her gaze moving cautiously around the space. The reception area was spacious, yet unpretentious, decorated with simplicity and care. The walls were covered with photographs, children laughing during activities, volunteers working side by side, and whimsical hand-drawn pictures from the kids. In one corner stood a small bookshelf filled with well-worn children's books and old but lovingly preserved toys. Laughter echoed from the far end of the hallway, drawing Evelyn's attention. She turned her head instinctively toward the sound, a faint smile flickering across her face at the cheerful voices of children. But almost as quickly as it appeared, the smile faded, replaced by the tension that had been gripping her since she arrived. She took a deep breath, her focus returning to the reception desk where a young woman with her hair tied in a neat ponytail was busy organizing paperwork. Evelyn approached, her shoes making soft sounds against the polished wooden floor. The young woman looked up and greeted her with a warm smile. Young woman, cheerfully,
"Hello, Mom. How can I help you?"
Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. Finally, she leaned slightly closer to the counter, her voice quiet but firm. "Evelyn,
"I'm looking for someone named Michael. Michael Carter."
The young woman blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she nodded.
"Yes, that's right. Michael is the director of the center. He's with the children in the activity room right now. I can take you to him if you'd like."
Evelyn pressed her lips together, her breath catching briefly before she gave a small nod. "Evelyn,
"Thank you. I would very much like to meet him."
The young woman's smile widened as she gestured for Evelyn to follow. They walked down a long hallway, sunlight streaming through the small windows, illuminating the space with a warm, vibrant glow. Evelyn moved slowly, her eyes taking in every detail. The posters on the walls, the colorful drawings taped to doors, the soft hum of activity in the distance. Her heart pounded faster with each step. The moment she had been anticipating, dreading yet yearning for, was drawing closer. She was about to meet Michael, a man she had never known yet who carried a significance so profound it had driven her on this journey. Every step brought Evelyn closer to a truth she could no longer ignore, and to a person she hoped could help her begin to piece together the fragments of a past she was only now uncovering. Michael's office, though modest in size, radiated warmth, much like the man who occupied it. The walls, painted in light hues, were covered with vibrant hand-drawn pictures from children and photographs capturing moments from community events. Gentle sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating every detail, from the neatly placed photo frame on the desk to the children's books lined carefully on the nearby shelf. Seated across from Michael, Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off the small photo frame on his desk. In it, a young woman with soft curls held an 8-year-old boy in her arms. Her smile was radiant, but her eyes carried a shadow of worry, barely concealed. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked on the image as a wave of tightness rose in her chest. Michael sat upright, his demeanor calm, though his eyes betrayed a distant sorrow. When he spoke, his voice was steady and low, each word seeming to summon memories long buried. "Michael, gently."
"My mother was an extraordinary woman. She gave me all the love she could, even when life was never kind to us."
Evelyn clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her eyes never leaving Michael. Each word he spoke pierced her heart, tightening it with an ache she could barely endure. Michael, speaking slowly,
"But she passed away when I was only 8, a sudden illness,
He paused, his gaze drifting to the photo frame on his desk. A faint, bittersweet smile touched his lips, only to vanish almost instantly. Michael?
After she was gone, I felt hollow. My father.
Michael hesitated, his voice faltering. His hands interlaced tightly, his fingers gripping so hard his knuckles turned white. Evelyn's brow furrowed, her heartbeat quickening as though some inner intuition warned her of the significance of what he was about to say. Michael, his voice trembling slightly.
My father wasn't there. He never was. I don't even know who he is. My mother, she never talked about him. All I've ever had is a name, but that name has never given me the answers I needed.
Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tightening painfully. The fragments of her journey, the scattered pieces she had carried this far, were beginning to align. The full picture began to emerge, and her eyes welled with tears as she stared at the man before her, his face etched with both pain and quiet resilience. Michael turned back to face Evelyn, his eyes meeting hers. There was curiosity in his gaze, sadness, and a quiet acceptance of the unknown. Michael, calmly,
I don't know why you wanted to see me, but I've grown used to not having answers. Sometimes I think, maybe God meant for me to live without half the truth.
His words resonated like a solemn hymn, heavy and unresolved. For Evelyn, they were daggers that cut deep into her soul. She could no longer remain silent. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the desk, her voice breaking as she finally spoke. Evelyn, whispering, her voice thick with emotion.
Michael, I think I know who your father is.
Michael froze, his eyes widening in shock before narrowing slightly, as though trying to process what he had just heard. Michael, his voice low.
What? What did you just say?
Evelyn took a deep, shaky breath, but it caught in her throat and tears began to streak down her face. Her voice cracked, but it carried both pain and determination. Evelyn,
I came here because of William Carter, and I believe he's your father.
The room seemed to freeze in place. Michael sat motionless, his eyes fixed on Evelyn as though trying to fit the pieces of a puzzle that had eluded him for a lifetime. Evelyn felt a tidal wave of emotion surge through her, washing away everything except the truth she had just spoken. After a long silence, Evelyn placed her hands lightly on the desk, her gaze unwavering, her voice filled with resolve. Evelyn,
Michael, I know this is hard to believe, but I need you to come with me. There's someone you need to meet.
Michael stared at her, his expression clouded with doubt and hesitation. But Evelyn's eyes, earnest, unwavering, and sincere, held him captive, pulling him toward an answer he had spent his life wondering about. Michael, hesitant.
You're saying I should meet him?
Evelyn nodded, her voice soft but firm.
God led me here, and I believe he wants you and your father to meet. This won't be easy, but it must happen.
Michael lowered his head, drawing in a long, deep breath. Finally, he nodded.
All right, if you believe this is the right thing to do, I'll go.
Evelyn felt a weight lift from her chest, though she knew the road ahead would be anything but smooth. Still, it had begun. She rose to her feet, her steps lighter than before, and guided Michael out of the center. Together, they walked toward a reunion neither of them could have imagined, toward a moment that would change their lives forever. The car rolled slowly along the long road leading to Evelyn's estate. Overhead, the sky was overcast, heavy gray clouds mirroring the tension that filled the air inside the vehicle. Evelyn sat in the front seat, her hands clutching her handbag on her lap. Her gaze drifted out the window, watching the passing houses and rows of trees blur together like faded memories. Yet her thoughts remained fixed on the meeting ahead. Evelyn, whispering, almost to herself,
"Dear God, grant me the strength."
She drew a deep breath, her eyes catching sight of Michael in the rearview mirror. He sat in the back, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery outside. His face was composed, almost cold, but his hands, clenched tightly on his knees, betrayed the storm simmering beneath the surface. The silence in the car was suffocating. Evelyn hesitated, wanting to break it, but uncertain of what to say. At last, she spoke, her voice soft but tinged with worry.
Michael, I know this isn't easy, but I believe you need to face it.
Michael didn't turn his head, his eyes remaining on the window. His response was low and detached, each word edged with bitterness. Michael,
I'm not sure what there is to face. A father who was never there. What could he possibly have to say to me now?
His words tightened something deep in Evelyn's chest, but she steadied herself. She knew Michael's detachment was a shield, a way to guard himself from the pain he wasn't ready to admit. Evelyn, gently.
You don't have to forgive him. Not today. You don't even have to understand it all. But sometimes the truth is the only thing that can free us from the past.
Michael let out a bitter chuckle, the sound laced with skepticism. Michael, quietly.
Freedom. I've lived my whole life without him. I'm not sure I need freedom from anything.
Evelyn fell silent, sensing the depth of the hurt behind his words. She knew there was nothing she could say to ease his burden in that moment. Instead, her eyes turned forward to the road ahead, where the estate began to emerge through the ancient trees. As the car turned onto the gravel drive leading to the mansion, the tension inside the vehicle seemed to grow heavier. Evelyn exhaled softly, her fingers tightening around her handbag as if to steady herself. Evelyn, in a hushed voice.
We're almost there.
Michael didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the large house now visible in the distance, his expression unreadable. Yet the slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his inner struggle, as though bracing for a battle he wasn't sure he wanted to fight. The car came to a stop at the foot of the stone steps. Evelyn opened her door and stepped out, her legs trembling slightly as they met the gravel beneath her feet. But she didn't pause. Turning back, she looked at Michael, who remained seated, his eyes locked on the house. His face was a mask of quiet intensity, his thoughts inscrutable. Evelyn.
Michael, are you ready?
Michael drew in a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists, before he finally reached for the door handle. Without a word, he stepped out, the slow nod of his head the only answer Evelyn needed. Together, they climbed the steps, their footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness. Each step carried them closer to the large wooden door, an entrance not only to the house, but to a new chapter where long-buried truths and suppressed emotions would be confronted at last. The door to the living room creaked open, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence that had settled in the house. William, seated in his armchair near the fireplace, lifted his head slowly, his weary eyes, marked by sleepless nights and relentless regret, filled with a sudden weariness. Since Evelyn had left, the mansion had become a prison of silence, a suffocating stillness he both accepted and feared. Now, the unexpected sound of the door opening shattered that fragile quiet, bringing with it something he was utterly unprepared to face. William's brow furrowed as his gaze landed on Evelyn. Her posture was upright, her steps deliberate, but her face bore a tension far removed from her usual gentle demeanor. However, it wasn't Evelyn's presence that caused his heart to falter. It was the tall man who followed behind her. Michael entered the room with a quiet intensity. His cold, unreadable expression remained fixed as his measured steps echoed across the floor, each one louder than the last, drowning out all other sounds. William couldn't tear his gaze away from Michael. His eyes widened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, as if he were bracing himself against the sight of a ghost from his past, one he had tried so desperately to bury. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The present dissolved into a cascade of fragmented memories rushing through his mind. Evelyn stopped in the center of the room, her eyes locking onto William's as if weighing every word before speaking. She drew in a deep breath, her voice low but steady, carrying a tone of unyielding resolve.
William, this is your chance to make things right.
William flinched, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. Evelyn's words struck him like a gavel delivering a final verdict, forcing him to confront a truth he had evaded his entire life. Evelyn took another step forward, her voice growing clearer, each word deliberate, designed to pierce through the walls William had built around his heart. Evelyn, firmly.
Tell Michael the truth.
William rose slowly from his chair, each movement weighed down by the burden of regret and fear. His hands trembled as they rested on the armrests for support. His eyes never left Michael. Eyes that brimmed with pain, remorse, and a deep-seated dread he could no longer hide. Michael stood motionless, his presence commanding the room. His expression remained impassive, his gaze cold and steady, as if he were facing a stranger rather than the man whose blood coursed through his veins. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken words and unprocessed emotions. William's arms hung limply at his sides, as though drained of strength. His breaths came unevenly, trembling with every exhale. His eyes, burdened by years of guilt and anguish, now glistened with tears he could no longer hold back. He stared at Michael, seeing in him a younger version of himself, though the man before him had eyes that felt foreign, distant, a mirror reflecting all the ways he had failed. In this moment, William felt as though he stood before a final judgment. There was no time left for excuses, no defense strong enough to shield him from the consequences of his choices. The years he had spent burying the truth now came crashing down like an unstoppable tide, eroding the defenses he had clung to. William opened his mouth to speak, but his throat tightened. After a prolonged silence, he finally forced the words out, his voice weak and thick with emotion. William, choking up.
Michael.
Michael didn't move, his posture rigid and unyielding. His face betrayed no emotion, but his sharp gaze bore into William, dissecting him with a cold precision, as though deciding whether this man was even worth listening to. William's head bowed, his lips trembling as he struggled to continue. His voice rasped, each syllable an agonizing effort. William, hoarsely,
I was wrong. I was so wrong.
He paused, the weight of his confession pressing down on him like a crushing stone. William, continuing, his voice cracking,
I never stopped thinking about you.
The admission hung heavy in the air, doing little to bridge the chasm between them. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't step forward, nor did he speak immediately. His cold gaze remained fixed on William, devoid of warmth, an unyielding wall against the older man's pleading expression. At last, Michael tilted his head slightly, his voice clear and cutting. Michael, emphatically.
Do you think that's enough?
William flinched, shaking his head faintly, as if he already knew nothing he said could ever be enough. His lips parted again, but no words came out. Evelyn, standing nearby, watched the exchange with eyes full of anguish. She placed a trembling hand over her chest, as if to contain the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. But she didn't interfere. This moment belonged to the two men, and only they could decide how it would end. Michael inhaled deeply, his expression hardening further as he spoke, his voice sharp and unyielding. Michael, coldly,
I don't need you.
William's body recoiled, as if each word were a blow landing squarely on his chest. His shoulders slumped further, his gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet the unflinching eyes of the son he had abandoned. But Michael wasn't finished. He continued, his tone steady and piercing, aiming directly at William's deepest wounds. Michael,
I've lived my entire life without you. I don't need a father, and I certainly don't need you to make things right.
William closed his eyes, drawing a shuddering breath, bracing himself against the relentless truth he could no longer deny. Evelyn, sensing the rising tension, stepped closer to Michael. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, a quiet plea for calm. Michael turned his head slightly to meet Evelyn's gaze. For a brief moment, his expression softened. Her eyes, though heavy with sorrow, radiated a quiet compassion that seemed to steady him. Michael, more quietly.
But if you brought me here, I'll listen.
William's head lifted slowly, his tear-filled eyes meeting Michael's. He swallowed hard, sensing the faintest glimmer of hope, a fragile thread he couldn't afford to let slip away. He took a hesitant step toward Michael, maintaining enough distance to respect the invisible boundary that separated them. William, softly.
You don't have to forgive me. I don't expect that.
He paused, his voice trembling as he pushed through the weight of his emotions. William.
But I need you to know that I was wrong. And every day that has passed, I prayed for the chance to see you again, even if only once.
Michael remained silent, his eyes still fixed on William. Yet within them, a faint flicker of something unspoken, a crack in his armor, began to emerge. Evelyn exhaled softly, as if the delicate spark of hope she had clung to now flickered just a bit brighter. In the heavy silence of the room, amidst unspoken grievances and painful confessions, the confrontation remained unresolved. But William's words, though steeped in anguish and inadequacy, seemed to pry open a door, a narrow passage through which two estranged souls might one day find their way back to each other. The living room seemed suspended in time, weighed down by an oppressive silence. Light filtered through the thin curtains, casting faint shadows on the floor where two men stood facing each other, a father burdened with regret and a son struggling to mask his emotions. Evelyn stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly over her chest, as if silently praying for something better to emerge from this tense encounter. William drew a deep breath, but it caught in his chest, as though his very body resisted the words he knew he had to say. Tears streamed steadily down his face, tracing lines over skin etched with the marks of time and guilt. William, voice trembling, broken.
I abandoned you.
He faltered, swallowing hard, his hands clenching at his sides as though to keep himself from collapsing under the weight of his confession. His red-rimmed, tear-filled eyes locked onto Michael's, carrying all the anguish he couldn't articulate. William, struggling to continue.
Out of my own selfishness.
Another breath, shallow and uneven, barely kept him steady as his voice cracked with the force of his emotion. William?
I chose to walk away from you, and not a single day, not one day.
Michael stood unmoving, his shoulders taut but his face unreadable. Yet his eyes, those eyes, betrayed a flicker of something. Evelyn noticed it, and a faint glimmer of hope stirred in her heart amid the stifling tension. William hesitantly raised a hand, as though reaching out, but then let it drop, as if too ashamed to bridge the gap between them. William, choking out the words,
I don't deserve to call myself your father.
His voice quivered with desperation, pleading not for forgiveness, but for a moment of understanding. William, earnest, almost begging.
But please, give me a chance to make amends.
His final words, though quiet, reverberated like a tolling bell in the heavy air. Evelyn brought a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling a choked breath. She glanced at Michael, who remained still, his eyes no longer as cold as they had been, but filled with a guarded wariness. Michael tilted his head slightly, his lips pressed into a tight line. His gaze bore into William, not with anger alone, but with a complex mix of emotions he couldn't yet name. Michael, voice steady but cold.
Do you think an apology can undo everything?
William didn't answer immediately. His head bowed, and his shoulders quivered as though he carried an unbearable weight. When he lifted his face again, his expression was raw with remorse and sincerity. William, softly.
No, I don't.
He shook his head, his lips trembling as he forced himself to speak, his voice fractured but determined.
I don't expect forgiveness. But I beg you, let me try to do something right, even if just this once.
Michael turned his gaze briefly toward Evelyn, searching her face for guidance. She said nothing, but her eyes, gentle and full of quiet encouragement, seemed to urge him to listen, to allow a sliver of possibility to enter. Facing William once more, Michael studied the man before him, a figure that had been absent his entire life, now pleading for a chance. The silence between them stretched long and taut, but in its weight, Michael felt something stir. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the faintest glimmer of a desire to understand. Michael, quietly,
I'm not promising anything, but I won't leave just yet.
William nodded, his eyes glistening with fragile hope. Evelyn exhaled a soft sigh of relief, though her heart remained heavy, knowing the road ahead would be fraught with difficulty. In the stillness of the room, William and Michael held each other's gaze. No grand reconciliation, no eloquent words of healing passed between them. Yet somewhere in the unspoken tension, a door had cracked open. A small, tentative passage that both men would need to fight to cross. The air in the living room felt as dense as a wall, an invisible barrier separating the two men standing face to face. William kept his head bowed, his shoulders slumped, a man crushed under the weight of guilt and regret carried for far too long. His face, already weathered by the passage of time, now bore the added lines of tears that hadn't yet dried. Michael stood tall, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his body rigid as if bracing against the storm of emotions threatening to pull him under. His eyes, sharp and cold, nevertheless, revealed a flicker of something deeper, a feeling he couldn't quite name, rising unbidden beneath the anger and doubt. Evelyn stood nearby, her gaze heavy with sorrow as she watched the silent war playing out between them. She could feel the unspoken pain tearing through both men. With quiet resolve, she stepped forward, her posture upright and steady, each movement deliberate and calm. She stopped between them, her eyes gentle but firm, carrying the weight of a mother trying to mend the deep cracks in her family. She took a deep breath, her voice steady and heartfelt as it broke through the tension hanging in the room. Evelyn, softly,
You may have lost so much time, but it's never too late for any of us to begin again.
Her words rang out like a delicate chime in the oppressive silence, easing some of the weight that pressed between William and Michael. Evelyn turned to Michael, her gaze filled with understanding, as though she were speaking directly to his heart. Evelyn, earnestly,
Michael, I know you've endured so much. I know your anger is justified, but you are not defined by that pain. You are a strong man, and I believe you can rise above it.
Michael flinched, his eyes momentarily flickering with surprise. He looked at Evelyn, his lips pressed into a thin line as though holding back words he wasn't ready to say. Evelyn seized the moment, her voice still soft but unwavering. Evelyn seized the moment, her voice still soft but unwavering.
Listen to your heart, Michael. Don't just listen to the pain. Listen to what you truly want.
Michael met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her sincerity. There was no judgment, no demand, only love and hope. Evelyn turned her attention to William, her voice lowering, each word carrying a quiet weight. Evelyn.
And William, you were wrong. No one denies that, but you are here right now, standing before your son. This is the opportunity God has given you. Don't let it slip away.
William lifted his head, his tear-filled eyes meeting Evelyn's. The shame that had consumed him began to give way to a flicker of determination. He nodded, almost to himself, as though silently vowing not to run from this moment. William, voice trembling,
I will do everything I can to make amends, even if it's only a small part.
Michael remained still, his head bowed. The hands he had clenched so tightly now began to loosen. His eyes, once icy, now showed traces of hesitation. Evelyn watched him intently, sensing the subtle shift in his demeanor. She took a step back, leaving space between the two men, though her gaze remained on them. She knew that whatever healing might come would not be from her. It would have to come from them. Yet, she could be a beacon, guiding them through the darkness. Evelyn, softly,
This isn't about what was lost. It's about what you can still find, if you're both willing to move past the pain.
Michael lifted his head, his gaze settling on William. For the first time, his eyes were not entirely cold. There was hesitation, a faint softening, and perhaps, just perhaps, a fragile thread of hope. Evelyn allowed herself a faint smile, though it carried the weight of her own uncertainty. She knew this was only the beginning. Turning toward the window, she looked out at the soft light of the sun filtering through the curtains. It was a small ray of light, but it was enough to keep her faith alive. In the room, thick with unspoken emotions, the tension began to ebb ever so slightly. Between William and Michael, a fragile bridge had started to form. A bridge that would take time, patience, and effort from both sides to strengthen. But at least it had begun to take shape, and for Evelyn, that was enough for now. Evelyn stood upright, her hands clasped tightly together as if to anchor her emotions. Her gaze remained fixed on Michael, her eyes carrying a profound sadness, yet holding the faintest glimmer of hope. She knew this moment could change everything, and she was ready to do whatever it took to guide the two men before her. Michael, tall and imposing, stood rigidly across from William, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. His face was a mask of stoicism, but his eyes, filled with a mix of anger, hurt, and a desperate yearning to be understood, betrayed the cold facade. When Evelyn handed him the envelope, he hesitated, his hand hovering as if afraid that whatever lay inside would shatter the fragile dam of emotions he had worked so hard to maintain. William sat slumped in the armchair near the fireplace, his shoulders sagging under the weight of years of regret. His trembling hands rested on his knees, and his weary eyes were fixed on the unopened letter lying on the table. He couldn't bring himself to look at Michael, couldn't bear to face the storm of emotions that was about to unfold. Yet somewhere in the depths of his sorrowful gaze, there was a flicker of yearning, a longing to be understood by his son, and perhaps, if fate would allow, forgiven. Evelyn moved slowly toward the coffee table, where the old letter rested quietly inside its time-worn envelope. Her eyes lingered on it, and for a moment, every memory, every emotion seemed to condense into this fragile piece of paper. With gentle hands, she picked it up, cradling it as if it were a sacred fragment of the past. Her demeanor was solemn, like a messenger entrusted with delivering a truth long buried. Turning around, Evelyn faced Michael. Her gaze softened with tenderness, yet a profound gravity remained. She looked at him as if willing him to find the courage she knew he would need in this pivotal moment. Evelyn. Softly but firmly. Michael, you need to read this before you make any decisions. She stepped closer, holding the letter out with both hands, her movements deliberate and heavy with meaning. In that gesture, she wasn't just offering a letter but a piece of the past that Michael had every right to know. Michael, standing a few steps away, hesitated. His eyes flicked between Evelyn and the envelope, conflicted. His silence spoke volumes, his inner turmoil visible in the tension etched across his face. Michael, quietly, hesitating. How can a letter change anything? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She only nodded, her expression brimming with quiet resolve, urging him to trust her. After a long pause, Michael sighed and stepped forward, taking the envelope from her hands with careful deliberation. He stood motionless, gripping the envelope tightly, but not yet opening it. His eyes found Evelyn's once more, seeking reassurance. Evelyn, standing nearby, nodded gently, her voice soft like a whisper on the wind. Evelyn, you need to know, Michael. Michael's gaze dropped to the envelope, his fingers brushing against its roughened surface, worn down by time. He hesitated for a moment longer, before slowly tearing it open and pulling out the letter inside. The paper was yellowed, its edges curling slightly, but the handwriting, precise, deliberate, and full of care, remained clear. He began to read aloud, his voice low and hoarse. Michael, reading.
William, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. I do not blame you for your choice.
His voice wavered, and he paused, swallowing hard before continuing. The words struck something deep within him, and as he read, his eyes began to glisten. Michael, shaky.
I know you did it for me, for Michael, and for the future you believed we deserved. But if there comes a day when you meet our son, please tell him you never stopped loving him.
Michael's grip on the letter tightened, his knuckles whitening as if the words themselves were too heavy to bear. His voice cracked as he continued, the emotion in each syllable unmistakable. Michael, choking up.
You were wrong, but that does not change the fact that you are Michael's father, and he needs you.
When he finished, Michael's hands trembled as he held the letter, his gaze locked on the worn paper, though his thoughts seemed far away, lost in the echoes of a mother's love and the haunting weight of her plea. The room fell into silence, save for the sound of Michael's uneven breathing and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. William, standing nearby, had his hands clasped tightly together, trembling as he watched his son. He had been silent as Michael read, unable to interrupt, his eyes fixed on the young man who was at once a stranger and his own flesh and blood. When Michael lowered the letter, William knew he couldn't delay any longer. With slow, deliberate steps, he moved closer, his voice breaking under the weight of his guilt. William, choking. Your mother, she always believed you could forgive me. He paused, inhaling deeply to steady himself, though his breath still faltered. His shoulders trembled under the pressure of his emotions, and when he spoke again, his tone carried the rawness of his pain. William, with difficulty, I was wrong. I chose the selfish path, the coward's path, and it left you to suffer alone. William lifted his gaze to meet Michael's, his tear-streaked face etched with regret. His voice grew more desperate, each word heavy with sincerity. William, pleading, but know this. There hasn't been a single day that I didn't think of you. I don't deserve to call myself your father, Michael, but if there is any mercy left in this world, I beg for one chance to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes. He stopped speaking but didn't break eye contact, his hands shaking as they remained clasped together. He didn't dare step closer, afraid that even the slightest movement might drive Michael further away. Michael stood still, clutching the letter tightly, as though it were the only thing grounding him. His eyes remained on William, and the coldness that had once dominated his expression was no longer there. Instead, his face reflected a turbulent storm of anger, pain, and a faint, reluctant yearning for connection. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured but cutting. Michael, low, steady, do you think this can erase everything? The years I spent searching for answers. William bowed his head, his clasped hands tightening as though in prayer. His response was soft, almost a whisper. William. Gently. No. I know it can't. Nothing I say can undo the past. Michael's hands trembled as he gripped the letter harder, his voice rising with frustration. Michael, firm, you have no idea what it was like. Wondering, asking, facing silence at every turn. William raised his head, tears streaming down his face, but his voice steadied with resolve. William, earnestly, you're right. I wasn't there when you needed me most, and I will carry that shame forever. But, Michael, I'm here now. I'm asking, begging, for a chance. I can't change what I did, but I can be better now. Evelyn stepped beside Michael, her hand resting gently on his arm. Her eyes were warm and unwavering, offering him a quiet strength. "Evelyn," softly, "Michael, you don't have to forgive him today. You don't even have to know if you can. But don't let the pain of the past rob you of the chance your mother believed in. She believed in love. She believed in forgiveness." Michael looked at Evelyn, her words sinking into the cracks of his heart. He drew a shaky breath, his voice softening, though it still carried the weight of his turmoil. "Michael," quietly, "I don't know if I can forgive, but I won't walk away, not yet." William exhaled shakily, relief washing over him like a fragile tide. His voice was barely audible, thick with gratitude. William, whispering, "I will spend every moment proving I'm worthy of this chance." Michael stood motionless for a long moment, his hands loosening, no longer clutching the letter with the same intensity as before. His face softened gradually, and the anger and pain that had filled his eyes began to give way to something gentler. He looked at William, his father, who stood before him with bowed head, awaiting a final judgment. Michael drew a deep breath before speaking, his tone no longer cold, but steady and deliberate, each word chosen with care. "Michael, gently, the past is behind us, Father. Mother, she's been gone for a long time, but you're still here. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life holding on to old wounds." William lifted his head, his eyes wide with surprise and emotion. His voice trembled, laden with overwhelming feelings. "William," choked. "Michael, Michael raised a hand, a quiet signal for William to stop. He stepped forward, the space between father and son narrowing. His voice remained calm but firm, his words carrying the weight of forgiveness and hope. "Michael, you made mistakes, no one denies that. But Mother always taught me that everyone deserves a second chance. I can't change the past, but I can choose how I live from this moment forward." William stared at his son, his shoulders quivering as tears streamed down his weathered face. Slowly, he nodded, unable to speak. Michael met his gaze directly and continued. "Use what you have to help others as a way to make amends. Mother believed you could do what's right, and I will believe that too." The room fell silent for a moment, the air heavy with the unspoken emotions swirling between the two men. Evelyn, standing nearby, smiled softly. She stepped forward, gently placing a hand on William's shoulder, her gaze warm and filled with quiet encouragement. "Evelyn, gently, if both of you are ready to move forward, then now is the time to do something meaningful. William, you can start by helping Michael expand this center." William turned to Evelyn, his eyes briefly widening in surprise before settling into a look of agreement. "William," quietly, "Evelyn." "William, that's exactly what I should do." He turned back to Michael, his voice steadier now, though still tinged with emotion. "William, Michael, I want to do everything I can to support you and the people this center serves. Please, give me that chance." Michael remained quiet for a moment before nodding slowly. A faint smile crossed his lips, a sign of his agreement and the possibility of a new beginning. Evelyn watched the two men, a sense of relief washing over her. "Evelyn," softly, "God has guided us to this moment. Now let faith, hope, and love take us the rest of the way." The three of them drew closer together, the cold distance and estrangement between them gradually melting away, replaced by connection and a chance to start anew. On the table, the old letter remained, no longer a symbol of pain, but a milestone, a marker of healing and the road ahead. The gentle light streaming through the windows bathed the three figures seated together in a warm glow, a quiet symbol of reconciliation. Evelyn gazed at William and Michael, her heart filled with profound satisfaction. At long last, the distance had been bridged and the wounds of the past had begun to heal. Yet Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. Michael's words lingered in her mind.
"Father, use what you have to help others as a way to make amends."
She smiled faintly, turning to William, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "Evelyn," softly, "William, this is your chance to do more than just make amends. You can rebuild not only your relationship with your son, but also bring hope to so many children out there." William nodded slowly, his gaze steady. The regret in his eyes was now joined by a spark of determination. A few days later, the room grew quieter as they departed, but their journey had entered a new phase. The atmosphere at the charity center was lively, filled with laughter and cheerful voices. Strings of lights cast a radiant glow, illuminating the colorful artwork adorning the walls. Small masterpieces created by the children the center supported. In the main hall, Michael stood at the center, his eyes scanning every detail with quiet pride. Behind him, William and Evelyn entered together, observing the scene before them. This was no longer just Michael's charity center. It had become a shared project, a pledge to heal, build, and inspire. William's hand tightened around the envelope in his pocket, a large donation to fund the center's expansion, the first tangible step in his journey toward redemption. Michael turned to look at him, his expression free of the earlier coldness, replaced by a quiet acceptance. The lights shone on the hopeful faces around them, heralding new stories waiting to be written, not only for the center, but for a family that had found its way back to one another. The charity center now wore a fresh new look, glowing brightly in the morning sun. A large sign hung proudly at the entrance, its message bold and clear. Future Children Support Center, a bridge of love and hope. Clusters of colorful balloons floated against the sky, a joyful emblem of renewal and beginnings. A podium stood prominently in the center of the main courtyard, surrounded by rows of chairs draped in white fabric. Volunteers and children sat interspersed among the guests, their faces radiant with excitement. Laughter and playful chatter mingled with the sound of applause and soft background music. Michael stood at the podium, tall and confident, radiating energy and purpose. Dressed in a simple suit, his eyes shone with pride and hope. Each word he spoke carried the weight of his journey, not just of growth, but of forgiveness. A clear testament to his strength in rising from the pain of the past. William sat in the front row beside Evelyn, his posture leaning slightly forward, as if determined not to miss a single word from his son. His eyes glistened with emotion, filled with remorse, but also brimming with hope. A father finally accepted by his son. Evelyn sat silently, her hands clutching an old Bible tightly to her chest. Her gentle gaze rested on Michael at the podium, watching him with the quiet pride of a mother, witnessing her child come into his own. The serene smile on her face was a testament to her faith in God, that love and forgiveness could indeed mend even the deepest wounds. Michael stepped onto the podium, the soft golden hues of the sunset casting a gentle glow over his tall frame, highlighting the confidence and maturity he had forged through the years. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes brimmed with emotion. He paused briefly, allowing himself a deep breath and letting the space quiet, as if preparing the audience for words that would come straight from his heart. He scanned the crowd, volunteers sitting attentively, guests listening intently, and children swinging their legs innocently, their curious eyes fixed on him. Finally, Michael's gaze rested on William, his father, seated closer than ever before. A faint smile crossed Michael's lips before he began to speak. Michael.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. This center, with its new sign, freshly painted walls, and a playground echoing with laughter, is not just a place for children in need. It stands as a symbol of forgiveness, of rectifying mistakes, and of finding family again.
Michael paused, his eyes sweeping across the faces in the crowd before settling once more on William. His voice softened, his tone becoming deliberate, each word carrying the weight of sincerity. Michael, earnestly.
Today, I don't just want to talk about the children. I want to share a personal story. I spent years carrying anger, feeling abandoned and hurt. But I realized through my mother and through God that forgiveness isn't about others deserving. It's about freeing ourselves from the chains of pain.
He turned fully toward William, his gaze gentling, as though speaking directly to his father in front of everyone. Michael.
And today, I want to thank someone for making this possible, my father, William Carter. He isn't perfect, and neither am I, but we both know the value of correcting wrongs and doing what's right. Thank you, Dad, for choosing to walk this path with me.
William, seated in the front row, was stunned by Michael's words. His eyes widened, as though he couldn't believe that forgiveness was truly being extended to him. Yet, as Michael's words sank in, tears began to stream down William's face. He bowed his head, his trembling hands clutching his knees, as if to steady himself against the tidal wave of emotion. The enormity of the moment overwhelmed him, and as Michael concluded his speech, William slowly rose to his feet. His steps toward the podium were measured, each one a testament to his courage. Standing before Michael, William said nothing at first. He simply looked at his son, his eyes overflowing with love, remorse, and pride, feelings too profound to be contained in mere words. At last, he lifted a trembling hand and rested it gently on Michael's shoulder. His voice was low, choked with emotion, but filled with earnestness. William, tarfully.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't let you down.
Michael smiled, a rare and warm smile, and extended his hand to grasp his father's in a silent promise. After the speech, the atmosphere softened, infused with a sense of hope. Together, Michael and William descended from the stage, walking toward a group of eager children. At the front of the group stood a little boy, about 7 years old, his wide eyes filled with curiosity and wonder. Michael knelt down and took a brightly decorated backpack from Evelyn, who had just joined them. He handed it to the boy with a gentle smile. Michael. Softly.
This is for you. Inside, you'll find everything you need to start a new chapter.
The boy looked up, his eyes shimmering with gratitude. But before he could utter a word of thanks, William crouched beside him, carefully tying the boy's shoelaces. His movements were deliberate, tender, as though seeing himself in this child. William, warmly.
Remember, you're valued, and no matter where life takes you, this place will always be your home.
The boy beamed, bowing his head in gratitude before dashing off to join his friends, his laughter ringing through the air. From a nearby seat, Evelyn sat quietly, clutching her well-worn Bible. Her serene smile reflected the deep contentment in her heart as she watched Michael and William together. Their journey, though fraught with pain, had led them here, to a moment of healing and unity. Evelyn gently closed her eyes, whispering a prayer that carried softly above the cheerful voices around her. Evelyn, whispering,
Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us to this place. Please continue to guide us so that this love and hope may reach even more lives.
As the golden hues of the sunset bathed the charity center, the space seemed to glow with a warm, tender light. The laughter of children filled the air, blending with the murmurs of volunteers and guests. At the heart of the courtyard, William and Michael stood side by side, their eyes reflecting a newfound hope. In front of them stood a small boy, no older than 7, his bright eyes wide with wonder at the attention he was receiving. Michael knelt, holding out a brand new backpack filled with school supplies and essentials. His voice was gentle, carrying a message from the depths of his heart. Michael, softly,
This is for you. Use it to write your own beautiful new chapters.
Beside him, William knelt as well, his hands resting gently on the boy's small shoulders. He looked into the child's eyes, his gaze full of love and sincerity. A gift not just for the boy, but a reflection of his resolve to make amends for what he had once lost. William, warmly,
Remember, you are valuable. No matter where you go or what you do, this center will always be your home.
The boy's face lit up with a radiant smile, his eyes shining with happiness. He bowed his head in gratitude before turning and running back to join his friends, the backpack bouncing lightly on his small shoulders. William and Michael remained standing there, their eyes following the little boy as he ran off. In his small, joyful figure, they both seemed to glimpse everything they had missed, a part of Michael's lost childhood, and the opportunities William had let slip away. Yet now, they both understood that it was time to use love and action to make amends, to rebuild from the fragments of the past. From afar, Evelyn sat quietly, her hands wrapped tightly around her old Bible. A contented smile graced her lips, her eyes reflecting a deep faith that God had brought them to this moment, to heal, to love, and to spread hope to others. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, giving way to the glowing lights of the charity center, the story found its gentle conclusion in the image of William and Michael, bending down together to hand a gift to another child. That image stood as a symbol that love, even when it arrives late, still possesses the power to rebuild, to heal, and to sow seeds of hope in every heart it touches. The secret is out, but can forgiveness truly mend decades of pain? Don't miss the next story on our channel, where more emotional and shocking twists await. Stay tuned,